What's up, Mr. It's the Russian dude. There is a point in every multi-year war when the most dangerous thing is no longer the battlefield update itself, but the realization slowly spreading behind it. The country is paying enormous price. The front barely moves. The towns being called liberated are often destroyed beyond recognition, and nobody wants to restore them. The number of verified names keeps growing, and even some of the people who supported the war from the very beginning start quietly asking what all of this is actually for. That is where Russia appears to be right now. In the early phase of the war, pro-war media lived in a completely separate universe, where every setback was explained as a plan, every destroyed town was presented as a victory, and every uncomfortable question was treated like betrayal. But after years of fighting, even some pro-war speakers are now talking about pointless losses, disappearing soldiers, exhausted units, and a country where the front consumes people while the rear loses internet freedom, political space, and just basic dignity. So today, let's look at the story of Alex Bakira from Kemerovo, who signed a military contract on February 1st, 2025, was injured by February 17th, waited around 15 days for medical treatment, lost all toes and 4 fingers on his right hand, was still later categorized as fit with minor restrictions, and then, well, disappeared after being sent on another combat mission in July 22nd, 2025. We will also look at Vladimir Laktushin, the former leader of the Rodina Party's youth department, who signed a contract on March 4, 2026, joined the Burevestnik UAV regiment, posted "Alright, let's go" on March 10th on his personal page, uploaded a photo with an assault rifle on March 11, logged into VK for the last time on March 12, and it just became another example of how quickly this system can process even people who thought they were joining a safer, more technical part of the war. And then we will connect all these individual stories to a larger picture. Mediazona's 203,306 verified Russian military names, the missing Donetsk and Luhansk figures before September 30, 2022, the broader number moving towards the 500,000 scale, the 433rd Regiment of the 27th Guard Motor Rifle Division, Medvedev's December 2024 letter, Putin awarding guards status a month later, and the growing connection between Russia's war abroad and the censorship at home. As you can see, so much to talk about today, so many specific examples, so let's get straight into it. Now imagine a man signs a military contract, and in just 16 days before he even has time to understand the system he entered, he is already injured at the front, waiting for the treatment, physically damaged in a way that should obviously remove him from the combat roles, and then eventually sent back again as if nothing irreversible happened. Well, that man is once again Alexei Bakirov, born in 1979 in Kemerovo, far away from the Moscow studios where professional patriots discuss the war like it is some kind of clean map with arrows and slogans, while real ordinary men from regular cities disappear into documents, Telegram channels and desperate family searches. We at this point know very little about actual Bakirov's life before the war, which already tells you something about how this system treats people, because he becomes visible only after the state has used them. What we do know is that he graduated from secondary school number 34 in 1996, served 2 years after conscription, and seemed like just an ordinary man who even lost access to his Odnoklassniki social media account and created new ones several times. Odnoklassniki, by the way, is like VK or Facebook, but just for older people. Anyways, after he entered the war system, the timeline becomes very clear. On February 1st, 2025, Bakirov signed a contract with the Ministry of Defense in Kemerovo, and by February 17th, only 16 days later, he had received mine blast and shrapnel injuries in the front line. But he was seen by medical personnel only on March 3rd, which means that he waited around 15 days before proper treatment, and during that time, he even suffered, unfortunately for him, severe frostbite-related damage, lost all toes and 4 fingers on his right hand through surgery, and still had small fragments in his legs, which in any normal system should have ended the question of whether this man could ever be sent back into combat conditions. But, well, as you guessed it, that's not how Putin's army works. I mean, he still has 1 finger left, so he can shoot, he can pull the trigger, right? I think this is what the Ministry of Defense must have thought. Bakira was classified as temporary unfit for military service and given 30 days of leave, but then he was assigned to the category fit for military service with minor restrictions. Which sounds just like routine paperwork until you realize it applied to a man who had once again lost all his toes and forefinger. Then on July 22nd, 2025, he was sent on another combat mission, and well, since then, his sister has been searching for him, publishing his documents on a specialized Telegram channel, because in modern Russia, families often have to become investigators themselves, just to understand what happened to their relatives and loved ones. And the unit where he served also matters here. Bakira served in the 433rd Regiment of the 27th Guard Motor Rifle Division, and according to Dossier Center investigation, this regiment has wasted and refreshed its personnel 3 times over a few years, which is just a cold bureaucratic way of describing a brutal human cycle where one group is used up, another group is brought in, and then just the process repeats continuously. While all of this was happening, the same regiment received the official honors. In December 24, for example, Dmitry Medvedev wrote a personal letter to it, and a month later Vladimir Putin awarded it guard's status. That is the whole system in just one image. From above, medals, letters, status and patriotic language, but from below, missing soldiers, damaged men being returned to duty, and relatives searching Telegram for answers. This is why the phrase temporary privates or single-use soldiers used by pro-war publicist Alexei Sukhonin fits just so perfect. Commanders remain in place, officials, television hosts and slogans, all of this remains in place, while just regular ordinary soldiers become temporary, replaceable and easy to process through the machine. Bakira's story could have stayed hidden inside family channels, but the next case was harder to bury because it entered the pro-war media space itself. Now, let's talk about Vladimir Laktushin. But first, if you guys want to see some bonus content and watch these episodes in very early access, please feel free to explore our Patreon memberships. This is absolutely the best way to support our work. The link is down below. Thanks so much. Now let's continue. Here's where the story becomes even more uncomfortable for the Russian system, because the war machine is no longer only consuming unknown men from distant regions. It is also now consuming people who are politically close to the system, people who joined voluntarily, and people who believed they could just choose a smarter, safer, more technical role. And that brings us once again to Vladimir Laktushin, the former leader of the Rodina Party's youth department, whose reported death was discussed by prominent pro-war figures, including Zakhar Prilepin, Russia's Today correspondent Filatov, and the blogger Zhivov, who personally, he says, at least claims, knew him. Laktushin signed a military contract on March 4, 2026, but he did not join through the most ordinary Ministry of Defense route. He joined as a volunteer unit. And not just any unit, but the Burevestnik drone regiment, which matters because unmanned systems are often advertised as a modern, technical, and supposedly and more importantly a safer part of this war. The image is quite simple. Drones, screens, technology, specialization, modern warfare, not this old picture of infantry just being pushed into the most exposed situations, trench warfare. But the timeline destroyed that illusion extremely quickly. On March 10, Laktushin posted, "Alright, let's go," on social media, and already next day on March 11 he uploaded a photo with the assault rifle. Just then the next day, March 12, he logged into his Wiki account for the very last time. So basically between signing the contract and his reported end, there were roughly just 10 days. 10 days is shorter than many vacations, shorter than some shipping delays, I don't know, shorter than the time it takes a government office to answer a basic request. But in the Russian war system, 10 days was enough for a politically connected volunteer in a safe drone regiment to go from contract signature to being discussed by pro-war commentators as just another loss in statistics. And so now here's the part that shows that how nervous propaganda machine has become. The blogger Zhivov later went on Komsomolskaya Pravda radio and reportedly said that Laktushin was not the only person he knew who died shortly after joining the troops. But guess what? Komsomolskaya Pravda trimmed that part from the audio and video stream, with the clock just unexpectedly jumping from 8:33 to 8:40. I mean, that edit says a lot, right? They were not dealing with an anti-war activist, not an opposition figure, not a foreign agent, but a pro-war voice saying something too close to reality. Laktushin's story damages one of the most important recruitment myths that the drone regiments, drone infantry, drone parties, drone places are safe, basically, what I was trying to say. Because the system wants people to believe that if they join the right unit, with the right motivation, through the right channel, they can avoid the worst parts of the war. But Bakirov and Laktushin showed the same outcome from just two different directions. Bakirov signed with the Ministry of Defense in Kemero, was injured after 16 days, lost toes and fingers, was still labeled fit with minor restrictions, and disappeared after another mission. Laktushin, on the other hand, joined a volunteer drone regiment and reportedly lasted only 10 days. One was an ordinary provincial contract soldier, hundreds of thousands do like this. The other was a politically connected volunteer. Still some, not that many, but still some. But once they both entered the machine just treated them both as just temporary material. And that brings us to the number that even some pro-war channels can no longer ignore. Let's talk about it now. This is the part that changes the scale of the story, because Mediazona's list of confirmed Russian military losses contains 203,306 names. And even that is not the full number, because it only includes verified names from public sources, obituaries, documents, social media posts, and volunteer research. Journalists and volunteers are generally believed to verify only about every other case, with the major delay, because they are still processing 2025 data obituaries, and Mediazona expects to finish that work by the end of 2026, no earlier than that. Then there is also Donetsk and Luhansk region issue, because residents of those places who died before September 30, 2022, when the regions were conveniently written into the Russian constitution as Putin and voted by Putin as part of Russia. All this just pretty much are completely missing from Mediazona's Russian reports, even though those men were heavily used and often treated as even more invisible and usable than regular Russian servicemen. So when you take 203,306 verified names, add the likely undercount and the delay, and then add the missing Donetsk and Luhansk category, the broader number of people fighting for the Russian army who never returned is rapidly moving towards 500,000, 500,000 scale. That number is becoming too large even for some pro-war authors to comfortably ignore. For example, the hardline pro-war channel New Russia's Militia reports called Mediazona's calculations and told readers to let it sink in that there are more than 200,000 verified names of Russian servicemen, while also pointing to drone footage posted by the Magyar channel connected to the Ukraine's Unmanned System Forces commander, where videos of Russian soldiers being struck by FPV drones appear multiple times per week. Well, we obviously do not need to describe those videos in person in graphic details. You all know how they look like. Because the point is not just the footage itself, but the battlefield reality behind it. Russian soldiers are being exposed to a modern war of drones, surveillance and precision targeting, while the Russian command structures continue feeding people into conditions it has not properly adapted yet, if ever. Even the pro-war channel compared modern military operations to a slaughterhouse in Siberia, only with people instead of cows, and said that there is a growing belief and feeling that if the current authorities cannot adapt to the nature of the war, Russia will not prevail. That is a major shift, because at the beginning, the official language was just destiny, liberation, victory and historical justice. But now parts of the pro-war world itself is talking about temporary privates, single-use soldiers, commanders burning through rosters, 203,306 verified names, and just a real number moving closer towards 500,000 scale. This contradiction is impossible to hide forever. The soldier is sacred in speeches, posters, concerts and television segments, but inside the actual system, the soldier is one of the easiest things to replace. Medals stay, commanders stay, officials stay, even television studios stay, but the private, the volunteer, the family search posts are treated as just temporary. That is why the next issue becomes so important. If the price is this high, then Russia has to explain what it is actually buying with it. This is where the military story becomes the political one, because if Russia is paying enormous human and financial costs for places like Avdiivka, Pokrovsk, Krasnoarmeysk, Bakhmut, Chasiv Yar, then sooner or later even war supporters have to admit that many of those liberated cities are not trophies, but just giant reconstruction builds covered in rubble. Back in January, for example, a popular mil blogger Alexander Arutyunov and the anonymous author behind the Fighter Bomber Telegram channel found a careful way to say this on Slavyov Live. Instead of directly criticizing Putin, they invented a fictional stupid nation obsessed with just territorial expansion. A nation that did not understand the consequences that these conquered cities could and eventually will become a massive burden, and that huge number of its own people were being just spent on ruins that would require astronomical money to restore. I'm not talking about Russia, I'm talking once again about this invented nation. But of course everyone understood who and which country they meant. The problem with ruined cities is that slogans are free but reconstruction is not. Maps with red arrows are cheap, but clearing debris, rebuilding housing, restoring electricity, water, heat, schools, roads, hospitals, just basic administration, all this costs a lot of real money. And if the human price of capturing those ruins is also enormous, then the idea of victory starts looking less like conquest and more like accepting ownership of a disaster. But this is not only about ruined cities in Ukraine, it is also about the kind of Russia being built at home while the war continues. A Russian soldier in 2026, for example, is not only being sent to fight over territory, but also being used to preserve a domestic political model where the authorities can say that because there is a war, people must accept YouTube slowdowns, internet restrictions, Telegram ban, WhatsApp threats, blocked rallies, pretty much everything, and just in general shrinking public space. The war becomes the excuse for censorship, and censorship becomes the protection system for the war. Every time people ask why YouTube is being slowed, the answer is just security. Every time people ask why rallies are denied, the answer is stability. And every time people ask why information is restricted, the answer is just wartime necessity. Finally, when people ask, I don't know, when this whole war ends, nobody just gives a real answer, because the war has become both the excuse and the mechanism. That is why protests against internet restrictions are more dangerous for the Kremlin than they look on the surface. A person can start just by saying, do not block YouTube. Sounds about right, sounds just common sense. And very quickly this arrives at the deeper issue. Why is the state so afraid of even information? And why is the war being used to justify life getting smaller inside Russia? This connection is now being said out loud, even in places much closer to the system than normal opposition spaces. Here is a very important part to end the video. Political blogger Vladimir Zmilevsky recently walked into Solovyov live studio and said directly that the endless bloody war and internet blockings in Russia are connected. That may sound obvious for especially observers outside Russia, but in today's Russia saying obvious things out loud can be the most dangerous move. Zmilevsky pointed out that people are constantly told to endure just a little bit longer. But more than a year and a half has already passed, for example, since YouTube's slowdown, and related restrictions intensified only since then. And if you count the blockings that began with the war, Russia has been living under this pressure for more than 4 years at this point. This is the problem the Kremlin cannot solve. People are told to wait, but nobody can say how long. They are told restrictions are temporary, but temporary keeps just becoming permanent. Nothing is more permanent than temporary solutions, as they said in the Soviet Union. They are told everything is necessary because of the war, but nobody can honestly define when this war ends, what are the end goals. So people naturally start talking about alternatives. They think about staying or leaving, whether restrictions will ever be reversed, and whether courts, legislation and information policy can ever return to something resembling normal. Zmilevsky reportedly went even further on his own channel, imagining a future successor, hopefully through revolution rather than revolution, who might partially undo what has been done over the past years and even decades, and then suggesting that much of society might look back and say, it's a pity he did not die sooner. That is a very astonishing statement from somebody in that environment, and symbolically Putin's own voice reportedly appeared at the end of that video, saying, it will not get any worse, don't worry. Which almost sounds like the slogan of the entire era, because people have been told that thing for years, while things just kept getting worse anyway. Comments under Zmilevsky's video reportedly suggested that he may be heading towards foreign agent status, very soon most likely, and nobody seemed confused about the real reason, because in modern Russia that label is often less about foreign influence and more about warning others not to connect the dots a little bit too clearly. Meanwhile, authorities across Russia are refusing to sanction meetings against internet blockings, often using excuses like pandemic-related restrictions, the one that also happened already 6 years ago. Because public health concerns suddenly become very flexible depending on whether a meeting is loyal or inconvenient. The system understands the danger that protests against internet restrictions can become a protest against the whole political course, because when people gather to demand free access to information, they're also asking why the government fears information, why the war is being used to justify censorship, and why citizens are expected to endure without a timeline, without accountability, and without an honest explanation at least. There is also a video from a meeting at one of St. Petersburg universities, where the administration and even some professors explicitly discourage students from attending rallies, which shows that the system is not only watching opposition activists, but also trying to prevent even just ordinary students from entering a political space that could grow beyond the original issue. And that is why all these details belong to one story. Alex Bakira from Kemerovo, Vladimir Laktushin from Rodina Youth Wing, the 433rd Regiment of the 27th Guard Motor Rifle Division, Medvedev's December 2024 letter, Putin's Guard Status Award, Mediazona 200,000 plus verified names, the missing Donetsk and Luhansk figures before September 2022, the broader number, approaching 500,000. Komsomolskaya Pravda trimming a dangerous segment from 8:33 to 8:40. Mil bloggers talking about useless ruins and temporary soldiers, students being warned away from rallies, and YouTube slowdowns becoming a symbol of the same war that is consuming people at the front. All these are not just separate stories, but parts of one system where the front consumes people, the rear loses freedoms, propaganda twists language, and just bureaucracy hides responsibility behind another demand to endure just a little bit longer. Guys, if you enjoyed today's video essay and heard something new besides just routine updates that many other channels do, please do like this video and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget about Patreon, the link is down below. See you on Wednesday.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe